"I'll take the unwanted one," said the Duke of Dellamoor, and the whole drawing-room went silent, for no one had expected the cold man by the fire to speak at all. He had come to Thornfield Grange to collect a debt, not a wife. Edmund, 7th Duke of Dellamoor, held the mortgages on half the county, and Sir Roderick Thornfield's were among the worst of them. A fortune borrowed against a failing estate and never repaid, and now come due at the worst possible moment for a man with 3 unmarried daughters and no money to dower them. Sir Roderick had summoned the Duke to the Grange in a fever of desperation, and had hit upon the oldest and most shameless of remedies. He would offer the Duke a daughter and a marriage settlement, and thereby fold the debt into a family alliance and save himself. Edmund had listened to this proposal with the same expression he wore for everything, a cold, still attention that gave away nothing and unsettled everyone. He was a hard man and knew it, and had long since stopped troubling to be otherwise. Grief had made him hard. His young wife had died in the 3rd year of their marriage, of a fever that took her in a fortnight, and he had learned from it that the safest way to live was to want nothing, love nothing, and let no one close enough to be lost. He had come to Dellamoor's cold, gray towers a widower of 30, and had let the cold of the place seep into him until they matched. He no longer remembered clearly what it had felt like to be otherwise. He knew, in the abstract, that he had once been a warmer man, that as a young husband he had laughed, had made plans, had believed the future to be a friendly country. But the fever that took his wife had taken that man too, and left in his place a cold, efficient one who paid his debts, managed his lands, dined alone, and felt nothing, which he had come to regard not as a wound but as an achievement. A man who feels nothing cannot be hurt. He had made a fortress of numbness, and had lived in it 7 years, and had told himself he was safe there, which he was, in the way that a man walled up in a tomb is safe. Sir Roderick had paraded his 2 elder daughters first, of course. They were the pretty ones, Vanessa and Sophia, golden and accomplished and thoroughly schooled in the art of pleasing, and both of them had been made to understand what was expected. They came into the drawing-room in their best gowns and their brightest smiles, and they curtsied, and they played and sang, and Vanessa turned her fine profile to the light and Sophia laughed her practiced laugh, and both of them looked at the Duke of Dellamoor with a hungry, calculating hope that he found, frankly, exhausting. He had seen that look on 100 faces. It was the look of people who saw not a man but a title, not a husband but a rescue. "They are both very fine," Edmund said when the display had run its course. His voice was flat. "You have 3 daughters, Sir Roderick. I was told you had 3. A small, telling silence. "The 3rd," said Sir Roderick with visible reluctance, "is Clara. She does not go much into company. She is not, that is, she would not suit your grace. She keeps to the still room and the accounts. A quiet, plain sort of girl, bookish. I should not dream of putting her forward. Vanessa now or Sophia." "Send for her," said the Duke of Dellamoor. She was some minutes coming, and when she came, Edmund understood at once why her father had tried to keep her back. Where the elder 2 were golden and polished, Clara Thornfield was brown and plain and unadorned, in a gray stuff gown with ink on one cuff and a smudge of something beeswax, he would later learn, on her wrist. She was perhaps 24, past the first bloom her sisters still traded on. Her hair was scraped back without art. She did not simper, or turn her profile to the light, or look at him with the hungry, calculating hope. She looked at him, in fact, with something closer to wary resignation, as one looks at bad weather one must nonetheless walk out into. And she stood a little apart from her sisters, in the way of a person long accustomed to being the one left standing apart. "This is Clara," said Sir Roderick, in the tone of a man apologizing for a lame horse. "As I said, your grace, she would not." "I'll take the unwanted one," said the Duke of Dellamoor. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa's practiced smile froze. Sophia's laugh died in her throat. Sir Roderick's mouth opened and shut. And Clara Thornfield, alone among them, did not react at all, did not gasp, did not color, did not glance at her sisters for confirmation that she had heard correctly. She simply looked at the Duke with those steady, unillusioned eyes, as though he had confirmed something she had long suspected about the world and found, on the whole, unsurprising. "You cannot mean Clara," Sir Roderick managed. "Your Grace, I must protest, Vanessa is by far the—" "I mean Clara," Edmund said. "The debt is considerable, Sir Roderick. It requires a considerable settlement to discharge it. I will take the daughter you least wish to part with the least, and pay you the compliment of not pretending either of us imagines this to be a love match. It is a transaction. I find I prefer transactions. They are honest, and no one is disappointed later." He rose from beside the fire, tall and cold in his dark coat, and for the first time addressed the girl directly. "Miss Clara, I will not insult you by asking whether you wish it. Your wishes, I gather, have not been much consulted in this house. But I will tell you plainly what I am offering so that at least you go into it with open eyes. A great cold house, a husband who does not love and does not expect to be loved, and a title. In exchange, I ask only that you run my household competently and give me no trouble. It is not much of a bargain. But it is a truthful one, which is more than most marriages begin with. Will you have it?" Clara Thornfield regarded him for a long moment. Then she said, in a low, even voice that had not one trace of gratitude in it, "You have described my life exactly as it is now, Your Grace, save for the title. A cold house, work to do, and no one who loves me or expects to be loved by me." A pause. "At least at Dellamoor the still room will be better stocked. Yes, I will have it." And the Duke of Dellamoor, who had not been surprised by another human being in 7 years, found himself, for one unguarded instant, very nearly smiling. They were married within the month, quietly, with no wedding journey and no pretense of joy, and Clara came to Dellamoor with one small trunk and no tears. Edmund had expected, insofar as he had expected anything, that she would be like the house, cold, silent, a fixed piece of furniture he might ignore. He had married her precisely because he thought she would demand nothing of him, and a woman who demanded nothing was the only kind he could bear. He was wrong about her within a week, and he spent the following months discovering just how wrong. Clara Thornfield did not demand anything, but she changed everything, and she did it so quietly that Edmund kept failing to notice the change until it was already accomplished. The great cold towers of Dellamoor had been run for 7 years by an indifferent steward and a housekeeper long past caring, and Clara went through them like a slow, warm tide. She did not scold or upheave. She simply began to set things right, one at a time, with the same unhurried competence she had brought to her father's still-room. Fires appeared in rooms that had stood cold for years. The account books, which Edmund had let slide into a genteel chaos, came back to him balanced to the penny in her small, neat hand, with quiet notes in the margin: "This tenant's roof will not last another winter. The home farm is being cheated on the corn. Your steward drinks." She was right about all of it, including the steward. She asked him for nothing. That was the thing that got under his skin in the end, that she kept, to the letter, the bargain they had struck. She ran his household with a competence that made his life immeasurably easier. She gave him no trouble. She did not weep or reproach or angle for his affection, or do any of the things he had armored himself against. She dined with him in near silence and bade him a civil good night and went to her own rooms, and asked nothing, and expected nothing, exactly as promised. And Edmund, who had married a woman precisely because she would ask nothing of him, found to his considerable annoyance that a woman who asks nothing of you becomes, in time, the most interesting thing in the house. He began to watch her. He told himself it was to assure himself the household was well run. It was not. He watched her because she was, he slowly realized, the first person in 7 years who treated him as a man and not a title, because she had entered his cold life with her eyes open, having been promised nothing and given less, and had responded not with resentment but with a kind of clear-eyed, unsentimental care that asked no thanks. She warmed the house not to please him but because cold houses ought to be warmed. She mended the tenant's grievances not to win his regard but because grievances ought to be mended. She was, he understood with a slow astonishment, simply good, plainly, unshowily, competently good, in a way he had not known people could be, and it disarranged every hard thing he believed about the world. One evening he came upon her in the still room she had claimed and restored, and stood a moment in the doorway watching her work by candlelight, her sleeves pushed up and her brown hair coming loose, grinding something fragrant in a mortar. She looked up and saw him, and did not startle, and did not put on any face for him. The old cook had rheumatism, Clara said, as if he had asked. This will ease it. Did you want something, your grace? No, said Edmund, and found, standing there, that this was not true. He wanted something. He did not yet have a name for it. The house is warmer, he said instead, since you came. Houses generally are, when someone lights the fires, said Clara, and went back to her grinding. I did not mean the fires, said Edmund, and left before he could say anything more foolish, and lay awake a long time that night in his cold ducal bed, disturbed by a warmth he had spent 7 years learning to do without. The servants noticed the change before he did. The old cook, her rheumatism eased by Clara's preparation, told anyone who would listen that her grace was a saint sent to soften the master's heart. The new steward, for Clara had been right about the old one, and Edmund had quietly pensionied him off, reported that the tenants, who had feared the Duke of Dellamoor for years, had begun to speak of the Duchess with an affection that spilled, by degrees, onto her husband. And Edmund, who had never in his life been spoken of with affection by anyone, found that he did not dislike it. He found, in fact, that he had begun to arrange his days around the small chances of her company, a matter to consult her on, a passage to show her, an excuse to stand in the still-room doorway and watch her work. He, who had wanted nothing for 7 years, now spent his hours inventing small wants, all of them her. He would not have admitted it under torture. But the whole cold house could see it, and had begun, cautiously, to be glad. He began, cautiously, to seek her out. He asked her opinion on the estate and took it, because it was always sound. He fell into the habit of lingering after dinner, and found that when he stayed, she stayed, and that she had a dry, quiet wit that revealed itself only to a patient listener, and that she read everything in his neglected library and had opinions about all of it, sharp and funny, and her own. He learned that she had run her father's entire household since she was 16, unthanked, while her sisters were groomed for advantageous marriages, that she had never once been taken to London, never had a season, never been courted, because she had been too useful at home to be spared and too plain to be worth the outlay. She told him these things without self-pity, as plain facts, and it was the absence of self-pity that made Edmund want, obscurely and fiercely, to go back to Thornfield Grange and set fire to it. You are not plain, he told her once, abruptly, in the middle of a conversation about drainage, surprising them both. Clara looked at him with those steady eyes. I have been told I was, all my life, by people with no reason to lie, she said. You are the only one who has ever said otherwise, and you have a reason to be kind, having bought me. I would rather you did not, your grace. I have made my peace with what I am. Flattery only disturbs the peace. And she returned to the subject of drainage, and Edmund, rebuked, said no more. But he thought about it for a week, and understood that she had built her whole calm self on the foundation of being unwanted, and that he had married her by calling her exactly that, the unwanted one, in front of her family, and that the word had gone into her deeper than he had known, and that he had a great deal to answer for. The trouble, when it came from Thornfield Grange. The winter deepened, and with it, though neither of them would have used the word, the thing growing quietly between the Duke of Dellamoor and his bargained wife. It grew in the smallest of ways, which are the only ways such things can grow between two people so heavily armored. It grew in the fact that Edmund began to take his breakfast at the hour Clara took hers, having discovered by accident that she rose early and liked the quiet, and having found that he liked the quiet better with her in it. It grew in the way she began, without being asked, to leave a particular book on the table by his chair, something she thought would interest him and was always right, and in the way he began to read them, and to mark passages, and to leave the book back on her table with his marks in it, so that they carried on, in the margins, a slow, silent conversation neither of them acknowledged aloud. It grew, above all, on the night the great chimney in the west wing caught fire. It was a near thing, a blaze that might have taken the whole wing if it had got away, and the household ran about in a panic while the old steward wrung his hands uselessly. It was Clara who took command, calm as still water, ordering the men to the roof with buckets and wet blankets, having the horses led out of the range of sparks, directing the whole operation from the cold courtyard in her nightgown and cloak with her hair down her back, her voice clear and steady in the chaos. Edmund, working beside his own servants on the bucket line, kept looking up at her, this plain, quiet woman he had married to give him no trouble, commanding his household through a crisis like a general, and felt something in his chest that he had no armor against at all. When it was over, when the fire was out and the wing saved and the exhausted household sent to what remained of the night, he found her alone in the courtyard, trembling now that the danger was past, her face streaked with soot, staring up at the blackened stone. "You were magnificent," Edmund said. He had not planned to say it, it simply came out of him. "I have commanded men in worse than that and seen them keep their heads less well. You saved the west wing and very likely the house." "Clara," he stopped. He wanted to say a great deal more and did not know how. So he took off his coat again, as he had taken it off in her father's drawing room, and settled it around her shaking shoulders, and this time he let his hands rest a moment at her throat where they had drawn it closed, and looked at her sooty, tired, extraordinary face in the light of the dying embers, and did not step back. Clara looked up at him, for once the steady eyes were not guarded. "You keep giving me your coat," she said unsteadily. "I find," said Edmund, "that I keep wanting you warm." It was the nearest either of them had come to saying the true thing, and it hung in the cold air between them enormous, and Edmund very nearly closed the small distance that remained and said all of it. But 7 years of armor do not fall in a single night, and some cowardly voice reminded him that he had sworn never to want, never to risk, never to love again, and so he did not close the distance. He walked her to the door instead and bade her a stiff good night, and went to his cold bed disturbed to the depths of his soul. But he had felt his hands at her throat. He had said, "I keep wanting you warm." And Clara had heard it and gone up the stairs with his coat around her shoulders and her heart, God help her, beginning at last to hope, which was the most dangerous thing a woman who had built her whole peace on hoping for nothing could possibly do. It was into that fragile, unspoken, almost flowering thing that Vanessa Thornfield arrived, 3 days later, with her fine profile and her practiced laugh and her patient, envious malice, to burn it down more thoroughly than any chimney fire. There was one dinner, midway through Vanessa's visit, that Edmund would remember all his life with shame. They sat 3 at the long table, and Vanessa was in her fullest brilliance, telling stories of the county, drawing Edmund out, laughing her practiced laugh at his driest remarks as though he were the wittiest man in England. And all the while she wove her poison so deftly that a listener would scarcely have caught it. "You must find it so restful, your grace, to have a wife who requires no entertaining. Clara was always so self-sufficient, even as a girl. We used to say she preferred the still room to people, did we not, Clara? No need to trouble oneself over her, she asks for nothing." And she smiled at her sister with a warmth as false as painted fruit. "It is a rare quality in a wife. Most of us are such a burden to our husbands, wanting things, wanting to be noticed. Clara has never wanted to be noticed in her life." And Clara at the foot of the table said quietly, "No, I learned young that it was not on offer." She said it without heat, as a plain fact, and returned to her soup. But Edmund, watching, saw the small flinch beneath the composure, saw the old wound take the fresh salt, and understood that Vanessa had chosen that particular arrow with care because it was true, because their own family had trained Clara out of ever expecting to be wanted, and Vanessa was pressing on the bruise she herself had helped to make. And Edmund, this was the shameful part, said nothing. He should have said something. He should have said, "She is noticed here. She is the most noticed woman in this house." But Vanessa's poison had already done its subtler work, had already whispered to him that his own warmth was mere gratitude, that he was a fool making the same mistake twice, that a wise cold man would not care what a beauty said to a drudge at dinner. And so he held his tongue and let his wife take the wound alone and saw her see him do it. That was the moment it turned. He knew it even then. Clara had looked up the table at him once with an expression he would spend months trying to forget, not reproach, never reproach, but a quiet dimming, the look of a woman watching the one small flame of hope she had allowed herself gutter out. She had let herself begin to hope on the night of the fire with his coat around her shoulders. And now she folded the hope away again, neatly, the way she folded everything, and Edmund watched her do it and was too much a coward to stop her. After that he retreated in earnest and told himself it was wisdom and knew in his heart it was fear. He was cold to her at breakfast. He stopped leaving books on her table. When Vanessa at last went home, her work done, her poison planted, she kissed her sister's cheek and murmured low, so only Clara could hear, "I did tell you he would tire of you, dearest. Men always do, of the plain, useful ones. Do try not to mind." And she swept away to her carriage well satisfied, having failed to win a duke but succeeded in the thing she cared about far more, which was making certain her plain sister could not keep him either. Clara stood on the cold steps and watched the carriage go, and then went inside to the still room and ground her herbs and did not weep, because she had unlearned weeping long ago. But that night she took out the small, worn housekeeping notebook she had kept since she was 16, and on a blank page at the back, in her small, neat hand, she began, very calmly, to plan her removal to the dower house. It was the sensible thing. It was the honest thing. And Clara Thornfield had never in her life been permitted the luxury of doing the foolish, hopeful, wanting thing instead. She did not know, she could not know, that at that same hour, 3 rooms away, the Duke of Dellamoor was sitting alone before his fire with an unread book in his hands, hating himself, and beginning, slowly, painfully, 7 years too late, to understand that the safest life is not the same thing as a life worth living, and that he was about to lose the only warmth his cold house had ever known through nothing but his own failure of nerve. So Vanessa's visit did its cold work, and by the time she drove away the damage was done. Edmund had retreated behind his old walls, and Clara had folded her small hope neatly away, and the warmth that had so nearly flowered in the courtyard on the night of the fire had frozen over again as though it had never been. And in the quiet days that followed, Clara did the only thing her pride and her bargain allowed. She released him. She came to him in his study one evening when Vanessa had at last gone home and stood very straight and said, "Your Grace, our arrangement was that I should run your household and give you no trouble, and that neither of us should expect affection. I have kept my half, but I find the house has become difficult for me of late, and I would not have you think it your doing. I should like your leave to remove to the dower house at the edge of the estate. I will run Dellamoor from there as well as ever, and you need not see me above once a month, and we may both have back the peace we began with. I think it would be better. I think it would be honest. You once told me you preferred honesty." Edmund stared at her, and in that moment, hearing his own cold bargain read back to him in her steady, unillusioned voice, watching the one warm thing in his frozen life prepare to withdraw to the far edge of the estate to spare him a discomfort he had inflicted through cowardice, the Duke of Dellamoor understood, with a force that took the breath out of him, exactly what he had. "No," he said. "Your Grace." "No," he came round the desk. "Clara, sit down. I'm going to say some things I have never said to anyone, and I will say them badly because I am 7 years out of practice, and I beg you to bear with me to the end." He drew a breath. "When I married you, I said I would never love you. I said it to your face before your family, and I called you the unwanted one, and it was the cruelest thing I have ever done, and I did it because I was a coward. I lost my wife 7 years ago, and I decided the safe thing was to want nothing, and I have spent 7 years being cold and calling it wisdom. And then a plain, dry, competent woman came into my cold house and warmed it without being asked, and balanced my books, and healed my tenants, and read all my books and argued with me about them, and asked me for nothing, and his voice was not entirely steady. I fell in love with my own wife, Clara. Somewhere between the account books and the still room, and when your sister came and made me feel it, I ran from it because I am a coward and I hurt you, and you did nothing but keep your side of a bargain I no longer want. I do not want the bargain, I want you, not the unwanted one, the only one. The only one I have ever wanted in 7 cold years, and the one I was too frightened to admit I wanted, until you stood there offering to go and live at the far edge of my life to make me comfortable. Clara Thornfield stood very still. The steadiness that had carried her through a lifetime of being the one left standing apart wavered, for the first time he had ever seen, and something moved beneath it. "You called me the unwanted one," she said very low. "I was wrong," said Edmund. "I have never in my life been so wrong. You are the most wanted thing in this house and the warmest, and I would tear down every cold stone of Dellamoor before I would let you go to the dower house to spare my cowardice. Stay, not as a bargain, as my wife whom I love and who I will spend the rest of my life proving it to if you will only let me. Please." For a long moment she did not speak, and Edmund thought his heart would stop. And then Clara, who had made her whole peace out of wanting nothing and had it broken, and was now being offered everything she had never let herself want, took one step toward him, and then another, and said, in a voice gone suddenly unsteady and young, "I stopped wanting things a long time ago, Edmund. It was safer. And then I married a cold man as a transaction, and I wanted him, and I hated myself for it. Do not say this if you do not mean it. I could bear anything but that." "I mean it," said Edmund, "more than I have meant anything in my life." And he crossed the last of the distance between them and took her plain, ink-stained, beeswax-scented hands in both of his, and raised them to his lips, and then drew her in against him at last, and held the unwanted one as though she were the most precious thing in England, which, he understood now, entirely she was. They did not go to the dower house. Instead, that same night, Edmund did a thing he had not done in 7 years. He asked her to sit with him by the fire and stay, and not go up to her own cold rooms, and Clara stayed, and they talked until the candles burned low, not of accounts or drainage or tenants, but of themselves, of the wife he had lost, and the girl she had never been allowed to be, laying down between them at last the whole freight of the years they had each spent armored against wanting. And when at length the fire sank to embers, Edmund found that the numbness he had built into a fortress had simply, quietly, gone and left behind a man who could feel again, and was not, after all, afraid of it. They stayed at Dellamoor, and the cold gray towers which had matched their master for 7 frozen years grew warm from the inside out, room by room, fire by fire, exactly as Clara had warmed them from the first. Vanessa was not invited again. Her poison, having failed, curdled into a bitterness that soured her own modest match and made her, in the end, the unhappy one, which no one at Dellamoor could bring themselves to mourn. Sir Roderick's debt was quietly forgiven, not for his sake, but so that Clara need never think herself the price of it. And the Duke of Dellamoor, who had once announced to a silent drawing-room that he would take the unwanted one, spent the long happy years that followed unsaying it 1,000 ways. In the fires, he built up himself in her still room of a winter morning. In the London seasons, he gave her that her sisters had been given and she never had, in the frank open way he looked at her across their warm table. And above all in the private name he came to use for her, spoken low, only ever between the two of them. Not the unwanted one, but the only one he had ever wanted, the only one he ever would.